Welcome, friends of the Crawford Art Gallery, to the library, and I'm delighted to have Áine Ryan with us today. Áine is a recent graduate from the Crawford College of Art and Design, and we met Áine recently at her Subject to Change exhibition. Delighted to have you here today, Áine.
Thank you very much, delighted to be here.
Well, we were thinking about your work, Áine, and we thought about in particular in reference to the time of the year, into season.
Yeah.
And we're heading into Lunasa and we're thinking of the Bales, Paul Henry's fields, and straight away myself and you have thought of yourself.
Yeah.
Your work really stood out because of the connection to land.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of what I do is try and investigate how the human connection to the land, especially because I'm a farmer's daughter. So I grew up with that connection, whether I wanted it or not. And I use materials like glass and turf to try and understand how those materials explain my ideas. So for instance, glass that I'm using has a very delicate nature, but also because it's transparent, one of the pieces, like the pike that I made, which we still have at home, we're not that up in technology, it's a disappearing thing. Not many people have them anymore, and it's the same with the slasher or the hook that I also made with the glass. It's so delicate, these traditions that we have.
Most of this has gone to machinery, of course.
Yeah,
now,
exactly.
So,
yeah. And like maybe we're living in the past in my particular farm, but it's all gone, and it's not just the physical objects, but it's also the knowledge in the mind. Like I'm thinking of my grandfather and the knowledge they had about the land and the materials and the objects that they were using. So I was trying to investigate that in my degree show. And some of it was sparked by a photograph of my father at the bog, footing turf from like the 1980s. And again, that manual labour, the appreciation for the breaking work, and how just trying to understand all of that, and being a person that used to love to travel, but also now how I love being at home on the farm, in place, that I have so many memories connected to, and that thing of trying to go but also always coming back. Even though some of the memories aren't always the best, they're quite back-breaking memories of being at hay and at turf, and injuries from the farm, because my dad actually, I cast his hand and he lost the top of his finger in a farming accident. So it's acknowledging that you're both, like someone said to me, you're both a lover but also a slave to the farm.
Would that have the connection with, I saw in one of your pieces, you had the chains?
Yes. Yeah, so I use the chain idea of how we are connected to the land and linked to it. So one of the chains I made was from turf. And quite a tricky thing to get turf to keep that shape, but it's almost as delicate as any of the glass objects I made, because if it fell at all it was gone.
Yeah.
But it's linking that, and also I made a glass chain then, as a glass chain that's hooked onto the back of a discarded Wellington that I found in a ditch at home, so I'm pretty sure it belonged to my grandfather, pretty sure. And a piece of scrah turf from the Cumras, from the bog, that we used to always go to show that thing of being bound and wanting to get away, but you actually can never get away, because that the knowledge that I would have from the land will always be there. So it depends on the setting I'm in as whether it's needed or not, that knowledge, but thank God that I have some of that. I feel very privileged to have had that.
There's a huge sense actually of memory and connection, even coming from generally just people coming in who maybe haven't had a farming background, but would have an appreciation for nature and for the land. And I think that's completely tied to the Irish as a nation anyway, so our connection to soil.
It's so funny you say that, because there was one or two people that knew I was working in turf, for example, who would not have grown up in a farm, but might have gone one summer to their granny's farm and went to the bog to collect turf, and that's the memory that sticks out for them. Or the objects that I had, like the pike, or the hooks that I made, like they might have seen that in their grandfather's hand like the one visit that they made during the summer. But it's amazing how materials of the land and the objects have that memory embedded in them. That just, it's, I suppose, like the smell of the rose.
Yes.
You know, that it just brings you back to a particular moment in time. And I guess one of the things I wanted was, I didn't want it to be always full of this lovely nostalgia, because of things like my dad, like losing his hand.
Yes.
They're not always the best memories
Yeah.
from working on the land. And even for me, bringing in the turf was not a fun thing. You're not going to have me going out the bog doing it now, because it's backbreaking. You often came away out of it with a summer cold. So yeah, it's double-edged kind of memories sometimes, but wouldn't trade them for the world.
And we were talking as well earlier, Áine, about how I suppose poignant it is for you this summer, because this summer is the summer that your father's retiring as a farmer, and all of these tools and all of these are nearly being not shelved, not just for, we'll say, farmers in general, but in particular for your dad this summer.
Everything, it feels like, is the last thing we will do. So whether it was the last cow that calved, or whether it's the last bale that'll be made, and he's adamant, you know, it's square bales this year, just to get the square baler out for the last time. Even though we've made round bales for the last couple of years, he's like, no, the square baler's coming out, so it'll be all.
Would that have been the traditional, the square originally before the...
When I was growing up with square, so from the 1980s, that's what I remember. But I do remember my grandfather sitting up on a machine for cutting oats, and it was a canvas. It was the canvas would collect the oats as it fell, and it would bind them, and then we would bring them in, all manually done, manually bring them in, and then the shave would be cut off them, so they're put into the pulp, and then they're just cut, so that the nuts are used for the horses that we would have had then.
Yes.
So yeah.
We were just chatting as well about Laura Fitzgerald's work upstairs. There's an exhibition on for anybody who can come in and have a look. It's on the top floor. I have made a place, and Laura has made her round bales from canvas and steel. And interestingly enough, just as a little story, Niamh, who's interning here with me for the summer, she mentioned that Laura has used the pink colour, and that Niamh herself, her own granddad's farm, she was always complaining that he didn't use the pink bales. So she was saying, Granddad, why don't you have the pink bales like everybody else has? So I think that memory of
definitely.
Square circle, pink, black.
Like the tradition for us is the square bale with the blue cord, and that's, I also had some of the blue cord used in the exhibition.
Oh, I saw that.
And even as since the exhibition has ended, I'm thinking of that blue cord's been stitched through some of my grandfather's clothing that's hanging up outside at home, because of the tweed caps and the tweed coats and stuff. But the square and the round, it depends, because the square bale was always easier to handle, and often it not just easier to handle, but the cattle sometimes preferred it, so you would have less wastage maybe than a round bale. And my father often knew from the colour of the hay which field it would have come from. So it's harder to tell that, obviously, when they're all black.
Wow.
So my dad had to change his strategy. He used to have to put the bales from a particular field in a certain way that he knew which field they were from, so then he would know that the cows would eat it. It's all mind games with the cows. But he would know which fields it would come from, and the cows preferred which grass from which field.
Lord.
Yeah.